Imagine, imagine watching a bright, really happy 7-year-old just completely melt down into panic-stricken tears.
Right.
And not because they scraped their knee or, lost a favorite toy, but because they accidentally touched their bedroom door frame with their left hand instead of their right.
Which is so hard to watch.
It really is. And as an adult looking at that from the outside, it makes absolutely zero logical sense. You just want to explain that a door frame can't hurt them.
Exactly.
But to that child, their brain is literally screaming at them that a deadly catastrophe is about to happen simply because they broke an invisible rule.
Yeah, and that right there highlights a fundamental trap we fall into as adults. We constantly try to apply, adult rationality to childhood fears.
Oh, totally.
Like, if a child is scared of the dark, we turn on the light to show them the empty room, right? We expect a simple visual proof to just settle the fear.
Because that works for us.
Yeah. Right, but when you're dealing with pediatric OCD, that logic just completely shatters. Turning on the light doesn't work, because the monster they're terrified of it isn't hiding under the bed. It's living entirely inside the architecture of their own thought process.
Wow. Yeah, that's heavy. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today we are immersing ourselves in the incredibly complex and, honestly, often deeply misunderstood landscape of pediatric mental health.
It's a vital topic.
It really is. We're pulling from a powerful parent guide titled, When Your Child is Stuck in What If?, alongside some fascinating operational and clinical data from MentalSpace School.
Right, which is an innovative K-12 telehealth initiative currently reshaping care down in Georgia.
Exactly. And the goal for you listening right now, whether you're a parent, maybe an educator, or just, endlessly fascinated by the mechanics of the human mind, is to decode the hidden language of the pediatric what-if loop.
Which is so crucial.
We're looking at what's actually happening in a child's brain, why our absolute best parenting instincts usually make the problem much worse, and how new infrastructure is actually managing to break the cycle.
Yeah, we're going to cover a lot of ground.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because it is so easy for us to project our own understanding of everyday garden variety anxiety onto kids.
Oh, absolutely. We do it all the time.
Right, like a child gets upset about a messy drawing and we just think, oh, they're just being a perfectionist. But a child's what-if loop operates completely differently than a typical adult worry.
It does, and to understand how to actually help, you have to step inside the environment they are living in mentally.
Which is not a fun place to be.
No, not at all. And it's vastly different from simple perfectionism. Perfectionism is a desire for a flawless outcome. Pediatric OCD, on the other hand, is an active neurological hijacking. Literally. The condition actively lies to the child. It hijacks the brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, and it tells the child that performing a very specific, often completely nonsensical ritual is the absolute only way to prevent a horrific outcome and feel safe.
And the internal experience of that is it's harrowing to even conceptualize.
It's terrifying.
Because you're a kid, right? You have limited life experience, and you are suddenly utterly convinced that your parents are going to die in a car crash unless you line up your stuffed animals in a precise color gradient within 30 seconds.
Yeah, and the execution of that ritual, it has to be flawless.
Right.
That's the insidious catch with this. The child performs the ritual perfectly, and they do get a fleeting sense of relief. The false alarm in the brain shuts off temporarily.
But the relief is a trap.
Exactly.
Because 5 minutes later, the doubt creeps right back in. Like, wait, did I line up the blue bear exactly an inch from the red one? Did I do it right?
And the uncertainty is just intolerable for them.
So they have to do it again and again. It's like hitting a snooze button on a blaring alarm clock just to get a brief moment of peace.
That's a great way to put it.
But every single time you hit that snooze button, the alarm comes back twice as loud. You're never actually unplugging the alarm clock. You're just delaying the noise while the volume in the room gets more and more deafening.
What's fascinating here is the distinction between that underlying fear and the outward behavior.
Okay, say more about that.
Well, this paralyzing cycle is driven by doubt.
Right.
And the desperate pursuit of the illusion of safety. But because the mental noise is so constant and so overwhelming, it becomes incredibly isolating for the kid.
Yeah, they're trapped in their own head.
Exactly. A child's brain is working overtime just to keep these invisible plates spinning.
And the truly heartbreaking part to me is that kids simply do not have the vocabulary to explain this to us.
No, they don't.
A second grader cannot sit you down at the kitchen table and say, "Mother, I am currently experiencing an intrusive thought loop driven by a malfunctioning threat response in my amygdala.
Right, they just don't have the words for that yet.
So they show us what is happening through their behaviors. These highly specific, rigid behaviors are literally just cries for help.
Yeah, and you see this manifest in ways that are so easily mistaken for misbehavior. Or just, quirky developmental phases.
Like what?
Well, a child might ask the exact same question 50 times in an hour, just desperately seeking reassurance. Or you might see the classic bedtime routine that suddenly takes 2 hours.
Oh, wow. 2 hours.
Yeah, because they need to redo the steps in an exact rigid order, and they're terrified that something bad will happen if they miss a single beat.
Right. And there was that example in the source material of a kid crying over a homework page that had to be rewritten perfectly over and over again.
Yes, that's a very common one.
And as an adult, your instinct is to think, wow, they really care about their grades. They're such a good student.
But the underlying driver isn't academic ambition at all.
No. It's a profound physiological fear of the consequences of imperfection. Their brain is telling them that a messy R is a literal threat to their survival.
And, many of these compulsions are entirely invisible, which makes it even harder for parents to spot.
Invisible how?
Well, a child might be repeating words silently to themselves to neutralize a bad thought they just had. Or they might hold their breath every time they pass a specific house on the street.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and they often refuse to share their intrusive thoughts with anyone because the thoughts themselves can be violent or disturbing.
So they feel ashamed.
Exactly. The child is convinced that merely having the thought makes them an intrinsically bad person.
So it creates this completely invisible prison. And because children express this internal terror purely through outward behavior, like those massive meltdowns when a ritual is interrupted, or sudden inexplicable avoidance of certain places, parents naturally react to the behavior they can physically see.
Which is human nature.
Right. But unfortunately, that leads parents right into the trap.
And this is perhaps the most difficult reality for a loving caregiver to face. The absolute most natural, deeply ingrained parenting instincts are the exact things that strengthen the disorder.
It's so unfair.
It really is. Caregivers typically fall back on two primary reactions when a child is distressed: reassurance and punishment. And both of these approaches fundamentally fail the child.
Okay, wait. Let me just push back on that for a second.
Sure, yeah.
Because as a parent or caregiver, your absolute baseline biological instinct is to tell a terrified child that everything is going to be okay.
Of course it is.
If your kid asks you if the house is going to catch on fire, you say, no, of course not, we're safe. How is comforting a terrified kid considered fueling the cycle?
I know, it feels incredibly counterintuitive. It almost feels cruel to withhold that comfort.
Yeah, it really does.
But if we break down the mechanics of what is actually happening in the brain, it starts to make sense. OCD is fundamentally a disorder that demands absolute certainty in a world where absolute certainty is, well, it's impossible.
Right. We can't guarantee anything.
Exactly. So when a child asks that same question 50 times, are you sure the door is locked? Are you sure we won't get sick? And a parent answers it 50 times to soothe them, the reassurance actually acts as a proxy ritual.
Ah. Oh, I see. So the parent becomes part of the snooze button?
Exactly.
The kid is outsourcing the compulsion to the adult.
Bingo. By providing that repetitive reassurance, the parent is unknowingly feeding the OCD's demand for certainty.
Wow.
You're validating the false premise that the situation was highly dangerous to begin with. You're teaching the child's brain, yes, you are right to panic, and the only way you survive is because I answered your question.
So it works in the moment, but it's a disaster long term.
Right. You are temporarily relieving the anxiety in that specific minute, but you are drastically strengthening the OCD's grip for tomorrow. You're basically robbing the child of the opportunity to learn that they can actually tolerate uncertainty.
Okay, that makes total sense now. And then on the flip side of the coin, you have punishment.
Which is also totally understandable from the parent's perspective.
Absolutely. You can easily imagine a parent who is just at their absolute wit's end after like an hour of a bedtime routine that keeps starting over from scratch.
Right, they're exhausted.
They're exhausted, they have to work in the morning,
Yeah.
and they might just snap, they might yell, or send the kid to timeout for being stubborn.
But the child isn't being stubborn.
Right. Punishment simply adds a heavy layer of shame to the child's suffering. The child doesn't want to be doing this either. They're exhausted too.
They're entirely trapped by their own brain chemistry. So if reassurance fuels the neurological cycle and punishment creates deep psychological shame, it leaves caregivers feeling completely paralyzed.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, they're watching their child suffer immensely and feeling like every single tool in their natural parenting toolkit is suddenly not just useless, but actively harmful.
Which begs the massive question. If our natural instincts are off the table, what actually breaks the cycle? Like, how do you dismantle the invisible prison?
Well, this brings us to the specific evidence-based antidote highlighted in our materials today.
Okay, let's hear it.
The gold standard solution is a specific therapeutic intervention called ERP, which stands for Exposure and Response Prevention.
ERP. Okay.
And we need to be clear, this is not general talk therapy or play therapy.
So no sand trays or coloring books.
Right. You cannot swiftly talk a child out of OCD using logic because the disorder is inherently illogical.
So how does ERP actually work mechanically? Because honestly, the idea of intentionally triggering a child's panic sounds terrifying to me.
It does sound scary, but the mechanism is rooted in habituation. In ERP, a specially trained therapist helps the child voluntarily face the fear that's the exposure part. Then, crucially, they teach the child how to resist doing the ritual that's the response prevention.
Oh, I see.
So if the fear is contamination, the exposure might be touching a doorknob. And the response prevention is not washing their hands immediately.
Which must be agonizing for the kid at first.
It is, but what happens in the brain is profound. The child's anxiety spikes, the false alarm blares, but because they don't do the ritual, they eventually learn that the anxiety peaks and then falls on its own.
It just naturally subsides.
Exactly. The brain's threat detection system slowly recalibrates. It learns, oh, I didn't wash my hands, and the catastrophe didn't happen. The alarm is broken.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The framing of this for kids is just brilliant. The transformation that happens during ERP relies on teaching children to boss back the OCD instead of obeying it.
It's a great concept.
I just love that phrasing, bossing back. I mean, it is incredibly empowering for a child. It takes this terrifying, overwhelming internal feeling and externalizes it.
Which is key.
Right. Some kids even give the OCD a silly name, like the worry monster or the glitch. It flips the power dynamic completely. The OCD is no longer this intrinsic flaw controlling the kid. The kid is learning to control an external bully.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that phrase bossing back reveals exactly why the parent coaching element of ERP is just as critical as the child's individual therapy.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, a child cannot successfully boss back the OCD if the parent is still stepping in to reassure them or complete the rituals for them.
Oh, right. Because the parent is still acting as the snooze button.
Exactly. The entire family system has to change how they respond to the what-ifs. Parents undergo intensive coaching to learn how to support their child emotionally, how to validate the fear without rescuing them from the discomfort of the exposure.
That sounds like an incredibly grueling process for the family, honestly. It requires immense discipline.
It really does. It's hard work.
But the outcomes are undeniably beautiful. I mean, as the child and parents practice this, the brain rewires itself. The rituals begin to shrink.
And then eventually they disappear.
Yeah. The mental noise that was so constant and isolating finally quiets down. Self-confidence returns because the child realizes they can handle hard things. And the parent guide we read makes a really profound promise. You are not going to lose your child to this. Help works.
It's a phenomenal statement of hope. And the clinical efficacy of ERP is exceptionally high.
But there's a catch, isn't there?
Always. Knowing that ERP is the antidote is incredibly frustrating if a family cannot actually get it. This is the massive bottleneck in pediatric mental health right now.
The access issue.
Right. You have parents armed with the knowledge that their kid needs an ERP specialist, but they are looking at 9-month wait lists and providers located 2 hours away.
Which is the perfect pivot to the infrastructure piece of this puzzle.
Yeah.
Having the most effective therapy in the world means nothing if the families who need it most are completely priced out or geographically isolated.
Absolute nothing.
And that is exactly why the infrastructure approach we're seeing right now in Georgia is so disruptive.
Right. This is where we examine MentalSpace School. This program is systematically dismantling the barriers to care by providing K-12 mental health support specifically designed for the school environment, and it's deployed entirely via telehealth.
And the logistics here just completely upend the traditional model. We are talking about same-day teletherapy.
Same day. That's huge.
It's unheard of. By assigning dedicated licensed therapist teams directly to individual schools, they maintain vital continuity of care. I mean, the child isn't talking to a random voice on a screen. They are talking to their designated school therapist.
Which builds trust.
Exactly. They handle immediate crisis intervention, and crucially, they integrate the family counseling required for treatments like ERP.
And the clinical qualifications are really what make this viable. The platform ensures clinicians are licensed, diverse, culturally competent, and most importantly for our deep dive today, they have K-12 clinicians specifically trained in ERP.
Which is so rare.
It is. They're taking a highly specialized, historically inaccessible treatment and delivering it directly into the educational environment where the child already spends their day.
And they have managed to completely bypass the traditional financial red tape that stops so many families in their tracks.
Yeah, let's talk about the economics of this.
Right, because when you look at it, MentalSpace School accepts virtually all major commercial insurance. BCBS, Cigna, Aetna, UHC, Humana. But the most vital detail is their approach to Medicaid.
This is the game changer.
It really is. They treat Medicaid as a true $0 barrier. I mean, imagine being a family in the thick of a pediatric OCD crisis. You're exhausted, your kid is suffering, and the massive hurdles of out-of-pocket costs and taking time off work to drive across town are just entirely erased.
They just vanish.
A $0 Medicaid option paired with same-day in-school telehealth intervention is a monumental lifeline.
It truly democratizes access to specialized care. And naturally, a system operating within schools is built with strict regulatory compliance, ensuring HIPAA and FERPA standards are met to protect student privacy.
Of course.
But the true value of this infrastructure is proven in the outcomes. The data shows a 92% reduction in anxiety symptoms among participating students,
92%.
alongside an 85% family satisfaction rate.
But, okay, the metric that really stops you in your tracks is the 89% improved attendance rate.
Yes.
Think about the logistics of waking up when you've been fighting an invisible monster all night. If you are exhausted by a constant stream of mental noise, if you're performing 30-second rituals endlessly just to feel safe enough to put your shoes on, you physically cannot get out the door.
It's exhausting just to think about.
Addressing the mental noise is the direct mechanism that improves that attendance metric.
And the systemic impact of that single data point is staggering. When a child isn't spending vast amounts of cognitive energy fighting an invisible prison, their brain is finally freed up to learn.
They can actually be kids again.
Right. They can actually wake up, go to school, and participate in their own life. It changes the trajectory from potentially dropping out due to school refusal to graduating and thriving.
Incredible. For anyone listening to you who might be recognizing some of these signs, the rigid routines, the relentless questioning, the sudden meltdowns over seemingly minor details in a child in their own life. These sources provide highly actionable, immediate steps.
Yes, don't wait.
Right. There is a free 2-minute pediatric OCD screening available at chenchtherapy.com/mental-health-test.
Yeah.
It's a really quick way to gauge if what you're seeing warrants a closer look.
Highly recommend checking that out.
And for those in Georgia wanting to explore this specific telehealth infrastructure, you can visit mentalspaceschool.com or reach out directly via email at mentalspaceschool@chenchtherapy.com to begin the process.
Having an immediate next step is so vital. I mean, in pediatric mental health, early intervention doesn't just relieve current suffering. It actively prevents a passing symptom from becoming a deeply entrenched, lifelong disorder.
It truly saves years of struggle. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to reiterate the core realization from the materials we've explored today. Pediatric OCD thrives in the dark.
It really does.
It thrives in isolation, feeding off a child's doubt, and it demands an impossible standard of perfection from kids who simply don't yet have the neurological vocabulary to explain the glitch in their brain.
But there is hope.
Lots of hope, because we also learned that it is highly treatable. With the precise application of exposure and response prevention therapy and the disruptive power of accessible telehealth platforms like MentalSpace School tearing down those geographic and financial walls, kids can absolutely learn to silence that noise.
They can get their lives back.
Exactly. They can learn to boss back the lies, rewire their threat response, step out of the what-if loop, and truly reclaim the freedom of their childhoods. So what does this all mean?
Well, I think it forces a profound reevaluation of how we view anxiety and behavioral quirks. And not just in the children around us, but in ourselves.
Oh, how so?
We established today that children lack the language for this mental noise, so they broadcast their struggle through rigid, repetitive behavior. But it makes you wonder if pediatric OCD is fundamentally about a desperate pursuit of certainty in an uncertain world. How many adults walking around today are still silently performing their own adult versions of 30-second rituals?
Oh, wow. That's a thought.
Right. How many of us are trapped in a what-if loop, double-checking, over-preparing, and constantly seeking reassurance simply because we never got the language or the specialized help to boss back that internal bully when we were young?
That is a deeply provocative thought to sit with and a really powerful reminder of why these conversations matter so much. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was a pleasure.
We hope that the next time you encounter a child, or even an adult, for that matter, displaying seemingly irrational, creaky behaviors or rigid demands, you might find yourself looking past the surface. We hope you view those moments through a much more curious and compassionate lens.
Until next time, keep questioning the obvious and keep looking beneath the surface.